Welcome back, everyone. Today we are diving into history's ultimate cautionary tale, the Weimar Republic. And yeah, we're using our signature elbow macaroni noodle art to map out this entire story. It is a bold, fascinating, and honestly incredibly dark experiment in ultra-progressive democracy. And we're going to break down its spectacular rise and devastating fall. But more importantly, we are looking at this from our modern 2026 perspective to figure out exactly what it's warning us about today.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap. 1. Born in chaos. 2. The hyperinflation horror. 3. The golden years. 4. The collapse. And finally 5. Weimar's warning for 2026.
Section 1. Born in Chaos, 1919.
Now, after World War I ended and the Kaiser fled, this fragile new government had to form in the quiet little city of Weimar simply because the capital, Berlin, was just way too violent and unstable for them to gather safely. Right out of the gate, this new republic was handed a poisoned chalice. They were forced to sign the punishing Treaty of Versailles, which essentially created a massive psychological ticking time bomb known as the stab-in-the-back myth. You see, a lot of Germans felt profoundly betrayed. They chose to believe a completely false narrative that their mighty army hadn't actually been defeated on the battlefield, but was instead stabbed in the back by the politicians back home. Those politicians were bitterly branded as the November criminals, which planted this incredibly deep seed of resentment.
Yet despite all that intense resentment, they drafted what looked like a flawless constitution. I mean, on paper, it was one of the most democratic frameworks in the entire world. We're talking universal suffrage, proportional representation, the whole shebang. But it contained a fatal flaw. Article 48. This was essentially a suicide clause that allowed the president to completely bypass Parliament and just rule by decree in a state of emergency.
Section 2. The hyperinflation horror, 1923.
Saddled with massive war reparations that they absolutely could not pay, the government made a catastrophic decision. They just turned on the printing presses and printed more money. The result? Absolute mathematical absurdity. The value of the German mark quite literally dropped to zero. It became mathematically worthless.
To put that into perspective for you and humanize it a bit, people actually had to carry literal wheelbarrows full of stacked cash just to buy a single loaf of bread. Savings accounts that families had built up over generations were wiped out overnight. And here's the thing, when you destroy the middle class's life savings, you utterly destroy their faith in the democratic system that let it happen.
Section 3. The Golden Years, 1924 to 1929.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is just how radically modern this era was. For a brief, honestly euphoric moment, the chaos paused. The economy stabilized thanks to some foreign loans, and Weimar Germany suddenly became the undisputed cultural capital of the world. I mean, you have the sleek, functional lines of Bauhaus architecture completely reshaping design. You have the dark, visionary cinema of films like Metropolis. You have the legendary, vibrant Berlin cabaret culture. It was an era of unprecedented social liberty, bringing newfound freedoms for women and the LGBTQ+ community. Berlin wasn't just a city, it was quite literally the most modern, progressive city on Earth.
Section 4. The Collapse, 1929 to 1933.
Unfortunately, those golden years were built on a very fragile foundation of American loans, and those evaporated overnight when the U.S. stock market crashed in 1929, sparking the Great Depression. The human cost here was staggering. We go from relatively low unemployment in the mid-1920s to a terrifying peak of 6 million unemployed Germans. The economic despair was absolute.
And, as history so often shows us, when the center cannot provide stability or food, it collapses. Desperate, starving people flocked to the political extremes. This resulted in massive, shattering political polarization. You had the Communists, the KPD, surging on the far left, and the Nazis, the NSDAP, surging on the far right. The moderate middle just completely evaporated.
Let's move to this next one and see how this builds, because it's basically a mechanical, step-by-step death of a democracy. Step 1, the Depression hits. Step 2, the center collapses due to that extreme polarization. Step 3, remember that suicide clause we talked about? Aging President Hindenburg begins using Article 48 to completely bypass Parliament. And finally, Step 4, in January 1933, conservative elites, fatally believing they could somehow, quote-unquote, tame him, convinced Hindenburg to appoint Adolf Hitler as chancellor.
Section 5. Weimar's warning for 2026, the fragility of institutions.
And this brilliantly illustrates why political scientists today view this era as a live diagnostic tool. The direct parallels are honestly striking. Weimar's proportional voting led to fragmented, small parties, which is something we see in many EU multi-party systems right now. Weimar's crisis tool, Article 48, well, that mirrors the increasing reliance on executive orders and emergency declarations we see in modern politics. And the hyperinflation of the 1920s, that maps remarkably well onto today's severe cost of living crises and wealth inequality. The mechanics are eerily similar.
This leads us to a crucial, unavoidable formula. Economic despair equals extremism. The glaring lesson for us in 2026 is that when the middle class loses its economic security, when they literally can't afford a home, groceries, or a future, they become highly vulnerable. They often become willing to trade their hard-won democratic freedoms for a strong man who simply promises to restore order and fix the economy.
Furthermore, the social landscape is acting as a direct mirror. The intense culture war of 1920s Berlin, that massive clash between traditional conservative rural values and what was seen as progressive urban decadence, is playing out all over again. Today's global social divisions, all those fierce debates over gender, tradition, and modernism, are echoing the exact same cultural fractures that divided Weimar Germany.
So the crucial point is this. Weimar didn't fail because it was too democratic. It failed because it inherited a ruined economy and a population that associated democracy with defeat. The system itself was structurally sound on paper, but the environment it existed in was highly toxic.
Which leaves us with a heavy but deeply necessary question to ponder as we look around at our own world today. If a perfect constitution couldn't save a democracy when the people stop believing in it, what protects ours? Think about the institutions around you, the economic realities of your neighbors, and the trust we place in our systems. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking the big questions, and I will see you next time.